create a new Keystatic project with npm create @keystatic@latest. Here we'll choose Next.js and we'll call our project Keystatic blog. Alright, it's all set up. Let's cd into our Keystatic blog and open it in the code editor. If we look at what's been generated, we have a Next.js app using the app router. And you can see we also have a post directory with a markdoc file here. Let's install the dependencies with npm install. And we'll start the dev server with npm run dev. Let's open localhost port 3000. And the homepage is listing one post, which is the post for which we found a markdoc file in the post directory. We can edit this post directly from the markdoc file. But what's really cool about Keystatic is it also provides an admin UI. We now have a super nice content editing interface, and I can change the content here. And our file has been updated. So right now we just have one post, but just for fun, let's create a new one. My second post. Wow, this is super cool. And we'll create that one. And now in our post directory, we have the second file. And if we visit our front end, we also have the link to the second post. Each collection and singleton in Keystatic takes an optional path property, which is where your content is going to be stored. Right now it's set to post/star. And so as a result, our posts are stored in post, and then star means the slug for each file. But say you wanted to put all of your content, all your collections inside a content directory. Well, you could change the path to content/posts, but saving that means Keystatic will not find these two existing posts anymore. In the admin UI, you can see there is 0 posts, but let's create one. And Keystatic now lists one post, and as expected, a new content folder with posts and then our post here has been created. So we don't need to recreate our posts, we can grab these two and drag them inside this folder. And now if I refresh the admin UI, we will have our 3 posts listed here. Couple more things to cover. You can see right now each post is its own markdoc file. And this is what happens if your path ends without a trailing slash. If I add a trailing slash, this means something different for Keystatic. It's going to expect each post to be a folder with the slug name and then an index.markdoc file in each. And that can be useful when you want multiple files for each collection entry. Once again, we're back to 0 posts and let's create one. And when I have one post, and if we look at the code base, you can see that this one was created in a directory with an index.markdoc file. If you need more complex path structures, you can also use the star in the middle of a segment. So say you had here my folder, and again, trailing slash or not will define if it's a single file or a directory. We're back to 0 posts. So the slug of our post was hello. So inside content/post, we have the hello directory and then my. So hello, my folder. And because there is no trailing slash, folder is the name of the file. So the differentiator here, the slug, is set at the directory level midway through the directory tree. And one last thing I want to show you, if you want to use nested slugs that span across multiple directories, you can use the double star symbol. And you can see that now all of our posts are being recognized because Keystatic is looking inside the post directory and then any nested directories inside of it. This is possible because behind the scenes, Keystatic supports the slash symbol part of the slug. So you can see here the slug is actually a string with slashes. We've got a posts collection, and now let's create a new authors collection. In the Keystatic config, I will collapse the posts collection. I'll scroll down a little bit, and here we're going to create a new authors collection. The first thing I'll do is wrap everything in a collection function, which is going to provide a lot of TypeScript help and auto-completion. And the first thing we'll define is a label. So we'll call that authors. And you can see that TypeScript is expecting a few more things. We need at least a schema and a slug field. Let's set the slug field, which should be a unique reference for each entry. And yeah, we'll choose the name of the authors. And Keystatic will make sure to store a different slug if there's 2 authors with the same name. We're also going to define the path for this collection. And I want this in content/authors/star. Right now we have an issue with slug field because the field name doesn't exist. Let's tackle that next with our schema. This is where we're going to define what fields should be available in this collection for each entry. And to relieve TypeScript a little bit, let's start with the name. A name would typically be a text string, but here I will use the special slug field to auto-generate a slug from the name field. And this field has been imported here from the Keystatic core package. So the slug field takes a name, and here we'll set, as Copilot is suggesting, the label to be name. Right now, I have enough to make my collection valid, and TypeScript has stopped complaining. So let's save and have a look in our admin UI. You can see that now we have two collections, posts and authors. And right now we don't have any authors, but we can create the first entry. And this is what the slug field does. It actually creates two fields, a text input, which is bound to this slug field, which is unique and can be generated. So if I type my name, Simon, you can see that the slug is auto-generated from this text field. So let's save that and see what happens. You might expect a new markdoc file being created in content authors/Simon.markdoc. But if we look at our file system, inside the authors directory, we have a YAML file. So what's going on? Well, it turns out that Keystatic by default will store things in YAML, but you can also configure it to store things in JSON or markdoc. In the config file, if we look at the posts collection, you can see that we specify the format with the content field content. This is only valid if there is a content field, which is a document field, and this is going to turn on the markdoc generation instead of YAML or JSON. For our authors collection, since it's just a text string, we don't really need to generate markdoc file, although we can if we want. But maybe we'd want to store JSON file instead of YAML. So here in the format property, we could define the data to be either JSON or YAML, which is the default. If I change this to JSON, our admin UI cannot find the Simon entry because it's looking for JSON files now. And if I create a new author, let's call this one Jed, and hit save, you can probably guess what will happen in the file system. We now have a Simon.yaml and a Jed.json. And if I was to convert Simon to JSON and update this to be valid JSON, Keystatic should now find two files in the authors, and there it is. No matter if you use JSON, YAML, or markdoc, you'll get the same content back when you read from the file system with the Keystatic Reader API, as we'll see in the future. Our authors collection currently just has a name field. Let's add an image field to that as well. Here's our authors collection, and so in the schema, we're going to add an avatar, which is fields.image, and we'll give our image a label of avatar. And that's technically all that's needed to have an image working. So let's take a look. In my authors entry form, I now have an avatar field. So let's pick an image and we're going to select this little cool basketball player and hit save. Let's take a look at what happens to our file system. If I go to content and authors, you can see that we have Jed and Simon. Simon is now pointing to an avatar.png file, and there's a directory matching this slug, Simon, and inside of there, the avatar.png file has been saved. So that's the default behavior for an image file if nothing is specified. It will name the file after the field name and place it inside a directory that matches the slug of the entry. In this case, we want to make things a little bit simpler for us to display the image on the front end. And since we are in a Next.js project, that'll be nice to output the image in the public directory so we can directly reference the path to this image in our templates. So alongside the label, we are also going to specify a directory property. And this directory property lets you output the image wherever you want, regardless of where the entry itself is stored based on the path. So if I want the images to go in public, I can do this, public/images/avatars. Thanks, Copilot. This will break the ability for Keystatic to find this image here. And as a result, we don't have any file in the avatar selection here. But if I re-upload the same file, and hit save, it has created a public directory with inside images, avatar, and then Simon, and inside of there put the avatar.png file. So instead of storing it collocated with the author's content, it's put it in a different place. This makes it easier to use images in a Next.js frontend, but when referencing files in the public directory Next.js, you do not mention the public segment. You basically start your path like that. So the other thing we can do to make things better is use the public path property, which is, as its name suggests, how you would like to construct the public path for a file regardless of where it's stored. So here we want our path to be /images/avatars. If I check what we have in our Simon.json entry, we're still pointing to just avatar.png. But let's one more time upload the image with our new public path setting and see what happens when we save. You can see that now the public path has been generated exactly like we've defined it in public path, and our image is still present here inside public images avatar slug avatar.png. I'm going to delete this file that is no longer relevant. And thanks to the directory and public path options, we were able to make a setup that will make it much easier for us to display images in our Next.js application when we do so. We have posts and authors collection, and now we want to create a relationship between the two. For each post, we want to be able to relate it to an existing author. This is our Keystatic config file, and so in the posts collection, in the schema, where we have a title and a content field, let's add an author field, and this is going to be fields that, and you can see the list of possible fields in Keystatic, and we're going to use relationship. Let's give that a label of author. And the relationship field also needs to know what collection you want to reference something from. So collection will be authors, which corresponds to the authors collection right here. And that's all we need to get set up. Now, if I go edit one of the existing posts, we now see an author picker. So I can select one of the existing authors or start typing the name to find it. And I can relate this post to Simon. Back in the code, if I go to check the first post here, you can see that now it's been related to Simon. So mind you, rather than a solid and persisting relationship, this is more a slug reference. The value will be saved as a string, and if the author slug changes, this will not get updated. Just something to keep in mind. All right, let's relate the other post to the other author. And since we've always been updating things from the admin UI, let's do it from code this time. So here, I'll go author Jed, which is the slug of the other author, and I'll save that. And let's go verify in the admin UI that the second post is connected to Jed, and yep, it is. We've created a relationship between the authors and the post, but currently each post can only have one author. Let's make it so that a post can have multiple authors that collaborated on an article. So a relationship field only lets you pick one entry, but we can use an array field to wrap around the relationship field to create a multi-author selector. Let's keep that author field as is for now, and I'll create another one, authors. And here we'll use fields.array. And inside of it, as Copilot is suggesting, we will have our fields that relationship. The label is authors with an S, and the collection is authors exactly like we had before. But we've wrapped our relationship field inside an array field. So if I save it like this, it will work, but the UX will not be that great. Let me show you. I'll go edit my first post, and you can see the existing author field. But if I scroll down, the authors field is called items, and that's quite confusing. So what's happening is we've given a label to the relationship field, but we haven't given a label to the array field itself. So here I can go comma and have an object. And in here, we will have a label of authors. That will make things much cleaner. You can see that now the label is authors, but as I select my authors, you can see that item 1 and item 2 is still not optimal, to say the least. So I'll save that, but let's go and improve the situation by also defining item label. And we can't get the actual name of the author, but we can get the value, which is the slug. And since it can be null, let's provide a fallback of please select an author. With that in place, the UX is going to be much nicer. You can see we have Jed and Simon. And if I was to delete the connection here, we would have please select an author. This is better, but it still doesn't really make sense to save a relationship without a value. If we look at our first post, you can see that it's going to store null in the array, which we probably don't want. So another thing we can do is make sure that this relationship is set in the relationship field to use the validation key. And here, make sure that is required is set to true. That way, if I select Simon once again, but then I delete it and try to click done, it is not going to allow me to do so because the author is required. So this is a little bit more fail-proof. And once I save this, our first post has now the two authors. So obviously we don't want to keep the author and the authors field. So let's go and delete the now legacy author field, because if we want only one author, we can use the authors field with one item. And because we've changed the schema, let's remove this from our first post and second post and verify that things work. So the second post has no authors. So let's add Simon to that one. And the first post should have both Simon and Jed. And yep, it does. In the posts collection, we have created the ability to have a repeated field with the array field that lets you pick more than one item. And this time we want to do the same for the authors, but we want to have the ability to have a different set of fields for each item instead of always having the same things to choose from. Let's say we want the authors to have a sort of portfolio or showcase section where they can either share links to websites or videos. And we want them to have a UI that lets them add one, either link or video, and add as many as they want. In the Keystatic config, we will find the authors collection, and in the schema after the avatar, let's add a showcase field. And here we're going to use fields.blocks. So inside here, we're going to define keys for every type of block that we want. The first one is link, and this one is going to have a label of link, and it's also going to need a schema. This is not a schema object here, but rather one field, but we can use an object field to have multiple fields in our schema. And so we want our links to have a label. This is the actual field, not a text label for the UI. Fields.text, and the label is label. Confusing, I know. And we'll have a URL, but let's use fields.url, and the label is URL. Yeah. And TypeScript is yelling at us. It expects a second argument, which is where we pass the label for the showcase. Here we'll pass a second object, and here we'll have label showcase. Let's take a look at what we have for now. We should have a blocks field that has one type of block, link, with a label and URL. Here's our showcase, and when we add, we can only pick from the link block, which has a label and a URL. Before we store some data, let's create the second type of block, YouTube video ID. And Copilot got it right. The schema is going to be a text field with the YouTube video ID. So we'll paste the ID at the end of the YouTube video, and then on the front end, we'll have the embed code that expects this ID to display the video. All right, let's save that. And we are going to add some showcase stuff for Jed. Let's add a link first. And we will add another link. And finally, let's add a YouTube video ID. And I have a YouTube video here, so I will just keep the ID of it. So let's be done with this. So let's save that and have a look at what was created in the Jed's YAML file. And so you can see we have Jed, and then we have this showcase array, which has a discriminant of link or YouTube video embed. So in the front end, we'll be able to use the discriminant to decide which components to show. Okay, see how the individual items just say link or YouTube video ID, which are the blocks types. Let's instead have an item label to maybe display the website label and the YouTube video ID. So back in our config for both blocks, so the link and the YouTube video ID, we can pass an item label. So here we'll have an arrow function. We'll get the item and return item.fields.label.value. And if it's not defined, let's return your link needs a label. Again, instead of doing this, you probably want here to have some validation. The text field validation is slightly different. There is no is required, but there is a length that can take a min and max value. So let's go min 1 to make sure it's not an empty string. And with that in place, we don't need to pass a fallback value. And maybe let's specify that this is a link, like so. Let's not forget a space. And so now we have link, ThinkMill website, and Keystatic website. And let's do the same for the YouTube video ID. We'll have an item label where we get the item, and we'll return YouTube ID plus item. That here we can go straight to value because it's not an object field, but just a text field. And let's also add some validation. So length, mean 1. And with all that, we should be set. So now our links and YouTube video ID are a little bit more descriptive, and something I haven't shown yet, but you can drag and drop these in any order. And so now if I save this and we check Jed's JSON file, the first link will be the YouTube video. All right, and to wrap up this lesson, let's go add some showcase items for Simon. So I here have a YouTube video. I will remove the timestamp and just keep the ID. And let's add a link. And we'll save this. And to make sure everything is up and running, check Simon's JSON file. And the showcase is here with the video and the website link. We have a list of posts and each individual post, but nothing about the authors at this point. If I go to the admin UI for this specific post, you can see that we have added this authors array here, and we want to now display this on the front end. We're already getting data from Keystatic in the front end. We just need to do a little bit more work. This is the page for the individual posts, and you can see we're getting the slug from the query parameters. And here we're getting the post from an asynchronous call to this reader. You can see we import this reader up here. That's a util function that we've created. This comes from a package from Keystatic core reader, and then we create this reader passing the Keystatic config to it. This reader API coming with Keystatic is extremely powerful, and we're going to use it right now. So we're getting the post from this reader, and if there is no post, we display post not found. And we can actually update this with Next.js not found that comes from Next navigation. And this will essentially redirect to a 404 page if no post is found. All right, let me scroll down a little bit. And since we want to get data about the authors, let's poke around with Keystatic's reader API. Const authors equals await reader dot, and you can see here I have access to Keystatic's collections, config, singletons. Here we want the collections, and we're looking for the authors. So I can either get a list of slugs for each authors, I can read a specific one based on a slug, or I can get all entries with all of the data. So if I was to get .all, and then below the title here have a pre-tag and JSON.stringify the authors, you can see I have the array of authors with Jed and Jed's showcase, and the same for Simon. But that's not what we want to do here. Instead of having all the authors, we only want the authors that are related to these specific posts. In other words, we don't want all the authors, we only want post.authors, which is an array of slugs of authors attached to this post. All right, very good. So here we have both Jed and Simon, but if I go back to the other post, we only have Simon here. So we don't want all the authors, we want to read the specific one based on the post authors. But read expect a single slug, and here post.authors is an array of slugs. So for each author in the post.authors, we want to await a promise that's going to return us the data for this author. So let's do this. Await promise.all, which will wait for all the promises to resolve. And inside of there, I can do post.authors. And for each author, I will await reader.collections.authors.read with the author. And perhaps I should rename this author slug, which is what it is, to make it a bit clearer. And I need to make sure that my function is asynchronous here. And so now the authors variable should be an array of authors objects, but only the ones attached to this post. Let's verify this in our front end. My second post has an array with just Simon, and the first post has an array with Jed and Simon. Perfect. Okay, so instead of displaying a pre-tag, let's delete that. And we'll first check that we actually have at least one author, and if so, here we'll have a fragment with an h2 that says written by, and then an unordered list where we will iterate through the authors. Authors.map, and for each author, we'll return an li author.name. And let's check out the first post written by Jed and Simon. Great. You may have noticed that we're missing the key here, and the slug would be perfect for that. But if we look at what the author object is, we have name, avatar, and showcase, but we actually do not have the slug. When you use authors.read, you do not get the slug part of the object. But what we can do instead of returning an array of just the data for each author is return an object which spreads all the properties of the author and also adds the slug, author slug. So now our authors array is an array of authors that contain the slug as well as the fields for each author. Very good, which means that now we can here add the key author.slug. Let's display a little more data than just a name, because remember our authors also have an avatar field and then a showcase. So we'll expand on that li item a little bit. The author name will go in an h3 tag. Next, let's use Next.js image component. And for the source, we will pass author.avatar. And yet, let's give it a width and height of 100 pixels and an alt tag of avatar for author.name. And just because we did not make the avatar mandatory, let's have a fallback image of, if we look in the public directory here, you can see that I've added a placeholder image. And here we go. Both our authors have now an image. You can see that Jed doesn't have an avatar, so it uses the fallback. And Simon has that cool little basketball dude that looks a lot like Simon's son. Each of our posts now has the authors listed, and what we want to do is link the author to an author page. This is our list of authors, so let's wrap the h3 in a link tag from Next.js. The href will be /authors/ and then we'll pass the author.slug. And I need to make sure that I import link from next link. And now the author names are links, and if I click on one, we should have a 404 page because we haven't created the authors/slug route. So let's go ahead and create that. So inside app, I will create a file which will sit inside authors/slug/ and the file is page.tsx. And here I'll export default async because we want a server component, function author page. And let's just return for now a div with an h1 that says author page. There it is. And you can see here we are on the Simon slug. And the way we can get this slug is with the params. And here we want the slug param, which is a string. So I can destructure the slug from params. And if we don't have a slug, we're going to render the not found route from next navigation. If we do have a slug, we will return author page, and let's add for slug. And there we go, author page for Simon, author page for Jed. And right now this is not connected to Keystatic data, so if I had any gibberish, the page would still work. So we are going to wire this page with Keystatic data, but before we do so, we need to take care of some styling problems here. You can see the other pages like the home page or the single post page use a different font family, use some spacing. And this is all coming from this global styles.css file that has a minimal amount of default styling. And if we look at what happens right now, our home page, which is these templates, imports the styles. And then our post slug does not import the styles, but it has its own layout which imports the styles. And so if we wanted to make it work, we could copy this layout file in the author/slug folder. And here I'd need to adjust relative path to that style file. Now, if I visit the author page, we would have the matching styles. But we definitely don't want to duplicate this layout for each page. And you might wonder, if I close all of these, why we're not importing the styles in the root layout at the root level of our app directory. Why don't we here import the styles.css file? because the rest of the layout is the same, which means that we could remove the import of the styles in the homepage. We could remove the layout for the individual post pages and remove the author slug layout that we've just created. And if I hard refresh this, this is the home page, this is the single post page, and this is the author page, and everything still works with only one layout. Great, but let's see what happens if we visit the Keystatic route. Uh-oh, you can see that our spacing, vertical and horizontal, which is defined in the global styles here, is also affecting the Keystatic admin UI because the Keystatic routes sit in the app directory, just like our other routes. And so obviously we don't want this. We want to let Keystatic do its own styling and only apply our styles to the front-end pages or the website. In other words, we kind of want to scope out the Keystatic directory and the API directory, which is also for Keystatic routes, when we define our layout with the styles.css file. And Next.js has this concept of route groups, which will allow you to scope a layout to a specific set of routes. All you have to do is create a folder name with parentheses, just like that. And so let's create this website or site group so we can leave Keystatic alone and only focus on our front-end routes. Inside app, I'll create a folder and in parentheses, we'll have site. Now I want to move everything except Keystatic routes in there. So the slug, which is for, and yes, I'll update the imports. So this is for the individual blog posts. I want the authors also in site. Yes. And I want my root layout, my home page, and the styles.css file also inside this site folder. So now if I collapse the site, all we have left is the Keystatic and Keystatic API routes and our reader util. So the home page inherits the style, the blog post page inherits the styles, and so does the author page. But if I visit the Keystatic route, none of the styles have made it through. Perfect. We created a new route for each of our authors, but right now it's just displaying the slug and not pulling data from Keystatic. Anything will work. Nothing is actually coming from Keystatic, but we're going to change this right now. In our author page, instead of just grabbing the slug and displaying it, we're going to use that slug to read content from Keystatic. So let's import our reader as we've done previously. And down here, after checking that we have a slug, we'll grab the author with const author equals await reader dot collections dot authors dot, and we're going to read the author by passing it the slug. Before rendering the data, let's do another check. And if we don't have an author, return the not found route. So now you can see that the anything slug did not match an author in Keystatic, and therefore we've got this 404 page. But if I go back to Simon, which I know is an author, this works. This tells me that it's working. So instead of having author page for slug, why don't we just display the author name with author.name. So now we have the Simon page, and if we click on Jed, we have the Jed page. Perfect. All right, so let's display more information about the authors. You can see we have the avatar and the showcase, and we're going to display that on that page. I'll start by displaying the avatar under the name. And here we've already done the work, so I can grab the image component that we use here. And we're going to use exactly the same here. Of course, I need to import image from next image. And let's maybe make the image a little bit bigger. So I'll go with 180 by 180. All right, and next, let's display below here the showcase for this author. Let's have an HR to make a bit of a break, and then H2 showcase. Okay, so we only want to show this showcase if there is anything to show. So I'll wrap this in a fragment. And before that, let's check that author.showcase.length is greater than 0. If that's the case, we'll render this fragment. And then since we now know that we have an array of at least one item, let's have an unordered list. And in here, we're going to iterate over the showcase items. And so we'll have a list item here. Let's give it a key before we forget. And here, I'll quickly grab the index from our map method and pass the index here. Okay, and to work out what we're doing, let's have a pre-tag and stringify the individual item. And whoops, I need a second closing parenthesis here. All right, and here's an unordered list. So we're obviously going to need to render a different markup, whether this is a link or YouTube video. And the way we can decide what markup we should render is with this discriminant property, which is present to all of our blocks. In other words, inside the li item, I can check if the item.discriminant is equal to, and you can see the autocomplete suggestion, which is great. So equal to a link. And if that's the case, let's for now have a string of link, and I'll duplicate this. If the item discriminant is YouTube video ID, we'll have a YouTube video. And of course, if you have more blocks, you can repeat this. You can have a more structured switch statement. But I think here with our fairly simple example, this is going to work quite well. So you can see that now we have correctly rendered YouTube video or link based on the discriminant. So I'll remove the stringified data and let's work on these two blocks. So instead of the link string here, we're going to see what Copilot suggests here. I think it's pretty great, except the props are wrong. Instead of URL and title, we're going to let TypeScript tell us what we have. Remember, our data is in this value object. We used an object field, and this value object contains our label and URL. So here we want the URL for the href, and then for the label, we want item.value.label. Let's remove the doubled up closing parentheses and curly brace and hit save. And the first link is the one we haven't worked on, but the link is now linking to Simon's website. And if I click on it, it's taking me to Simon's website. So that works pretty well. Nice, so our links are taken care of. And let's do the same for the YouTube video ID discriminant. Copilot is going to suggest an iframe. Let's accept this. For some reason, it's not great at closing the syntax, but let's fix that. And this seems to me absolutely perfect. We have the YouTube embed with the item.value, which is a string. Remember, the item when a link is a value object, but when a video ID is literally just a string. And this is the correct string here. So I should be able to save and see my YouTube video displayed properly. Here's a quick demo of the Tailwind merge utility. Very cool. And let's take a look at what happens on Jed's profile. You can see the placeholder image, and then Jed has a YouTube video and 2 links to Keystatic and ThinkMill, which work properly. Sweet. Right now, on the single post page, we are displaying the authors, but on a single author page, we are not showing what posts this author has created. The way the relationship between post and author is set up is each post has an authors array field, and you can think of it as a belongs to relationship where each post belongs to 0, 1, or multiple authors. Technically, there is nothing on the author dataset that makes any mention of a specific post. So if we wanted to display on an author's page which posts this author has written, we gotta get this information from the other side. We'll need to iterate over all the posts and then figuring out which of these posts lists a specific author in the authors array. And that's what we're going to do right now. In the author page, we're getting the slug from the URL params, and then we're getting the author that corresponds to that slug. And so below here, we're going to get a list of all the posts. Remember, this is asynchronous code on the server side, and we can build static pages from that. So this is not too much of a problem in terms of performance. So we want to get all the posts and then filter those posts by checking which ones contain the author slug in their array of authors. So let's get all the posts. Const all posts equals await reader.collections.post.all. And then we want to filter out the post written by the current author. So let's do const author posts equals, and here we will filter our array of all posts, but instead of the check here, I will keep the entries where post.entry.authors includes our slug. And remember here, slug comes from the URL params, which is the author slug. So if we've done this right, the author posts should be an array of posts which have been related to the current author. And let's verify this. So I'll scoot down after our showcase. And here, let's check first that we have an author posts array, like so. And if we do, we'll have a fragment, and like we did before, an HR, and then an h2 tag that says posts written, and an ordered list. And inside here, we're going to iterate over the author posts array And for each post, let's have an li item with the key of post dot. We should have the slug, yep. And let's just display for now the post.entry.title. And let's take a look at the front end to see what we've got. Here I'm on the Simon page, I have the showcase, and then I have 2 posts written because Simon has been linked to both posts. And if I check out Jed's profile, who wrote one of the posts, we should see only 1 post. To wrap it up, let's turn this into a link to the actual post. So instead of the title of the post, we'll have a next link tag. The href will be /post.slug. And for the text, we'll have the post.entry.title. So now we should be able to navigate between posts and author freely. Let's start from the home page. So I will check the first post and then I will go on Jed's profile. Jed's profile should now link to the first post as well. From here, we can go to Simon, which has 2 posts in the post written. So we can access the second post from there, which is written by Simon. Everything's working properly. In our authors page, we're currently rendering all the showcase blocks inline. So we have the link block, and then we have the YouTube video block. And there's nothing wrong with doing that here. But let's say that for some reason, we wanted to move some of this markup to different files, to component files. That might be useful if you have a lot more blocks and you want to break down each block into its own component. Or say you wanted to use the showcase on another page, that would be a good idea to have this code living in a reusable component. So what we're going to do is take these different blocks, and instead of having that in the individual author page, we're going to create a new component folder and have the files living in there. So let's create a first component file, showcase-link.tsx, and I'll basically copy what is inside this link discriminant, so the anchor tag, and create a component out of this. Export function showcase link, which will return our anchor tag. Obviously, before this works, it's going to need to receive some props. It needs a URL and a label. So let's accept these here, and then we can get rid of item.value in both instances. Now in our authors page, let's get rid of that. And instead, we're going to import the showcase link component we've just created and pass the URL and the label. But let's not get confused by Copilot. This is item.value.url and item.value.label. And if we check an author page, this still works, everything shows properly, but by moving our showcase link in its own component, we've lost a good amount of type safety. For example, as the URL, I could pass a number, 34, and as a label, I could have an object with the foo bar key value pair. And you can see that nothing is telling me I am doing anything wrong because URL and label can be any. That's a problem because our front end is now broken because we're passing data that it doesn't know what to do with. And so to guard against that, we'd want to have some types inside our component here. And yeah, sure, we could create a type showcase link props, which has a URL and a label both set as strings, and then mark our showcase link component as showcase link props. And by doing so, now we will be told, hey, you shouldn't pass a number, this is expecting a string. And here, do not pass an object with a foo property, it also wants a string. And here, if we're going back, everything would be TypeScript happy, and the front end would be front end happy. But that's a bit of a bummer to have to manually create these props to mirror Keystatic's showcase blocks. So in this case, for the link, but we'll also have to do the same for the YouTube video and any other blocks that you may have. And so we don't want to do this. Okay, so instead of manually recreating types to mirror what Keystatic does, we're going to use something that Keystatic's reader exports for us, the entry type. In the showcase link component, I'm going to import the entry type from Keystatic core reader. And now watch this, we're going to do a bit of TypeScript gymnastic, and you don't have to do this, but I'll break it down in 2 layers here so it's a bit easier to understand. Let's say we wanted to have the type for an author entry. Type author entry equals entry, bear with me, type of, and we're going to pass the Keystatic config. And here in square brackets, I can reach the different property of the Keystatic config. In our case, we want the collections, and then we want the authors. And by doing this, I now have the complex entry type of each author entry. And you can see here, it has a name, an avatar, and then a showcase with the different discriminant for link and YouTube video ID. Here, we're only concerned by the showcase link. So instead of an author entry, let's get showcase. I can drill down inside my entry and get the showcase. And so now our showcase type is only the showcase, which is either a discriminant of link with the value object or a discriminant of YouTube video ID with a string. And it's an array of these because it's a repeatable field. And so this is the tricky part, and that's also why I wanted to break it down in 2 layers. We're going to try to narrow down our type to only the link discriminant for this component. So I'm going to delete this manually created showcase link props object and try to create it from our showcase here. What we want to do here is extract the link discriminant, and so I will use TypeScript's extract. And what we want to extract from is the showcase. And because it's an array, we want just one index of this, and I can pass here number to get one index of this array. And extract expect a second argument, which is the condition we want to extract on. And here we want to filter out based on the discriminant and only keep the one where the discriminant is link. This is still not right, but let's take a look at what we have. We have now narrowed down our showcase link props to only an object of the link discriminant with the value. And so what we're really interested in here is this value object with the URL and label. So at the end of this, I can drill down to the value property. Whew, I think we've done it. Our showcase link props is now a URL and label strings, just like we did manually, but we're now getting this data from Keystatic, and if the Keystatic config changes, if our schema changes for the showcases, our showcase link props type will also change accordingly. And now once again, if instead of passing a string, I pass a number, it's going to immediately yell at me and say that number is not assignable to a type string. So let's go back to item.value.url. Let's rapidly repeat the procedure for the video block type. In components, I'll have another file called showcase YouTube video.tsx. It'll export a function called showcase YouTube video that returns whatever was returned inside a condition here. So I'll copy that and paste it here. And we want our showcase YouTube video component to receive a, let's call it video ID, which we can pass here. So let's delete this. Instead, use our showcase YouTube video component and pass the item.value as the video ID prop. And it still works. Once again, I could have here something different like an empty array, and our video would now be broken without anything telling us what's wrong because video ID is any. We're gonna work out the correct type from Keystatic's entry. Type showcase YouTube video props. Let's try to do it in one go this time. So first, let's get our showcase entry type of Keystatic config, square brackets, collections, square brackets, authors, and then reach out for the showcase. And from there, we want to extract from that showcase the items where the discriminant is YouTube video ID. And finally, we want to get the value. Did I do it right? Let's check what we've got. Nope, I did not. So let's have a look. Our showcase here for video ID. Okay, so it is YouTube video ID in camel case. So let's replace that. And now I'm hoping that this showcase YouTube video props is a string. Nope, still not. Aha, yeah, I know what's wrong. Remember that this showcase is actually an array. And so we want to grab only one of them by passing number here. And so it turns out it wasn't a terrible idea to break it down in 2 layers because it's quite tricky to work it out in one go. It's also not necessarily the most readable type here, but we should now have a string. Yes, we do. So I've made the decision to name that prop video ID. So the exact type that we're looking for is that object with video ID as the key and this crazy extraction as the value. And so now I should be able to define this as showcase YouTube video props, which really is an object with a video ID set to a string. And now when we use our showcase YouTube video component, we should have more useful information if we pass something wrong, like an empty object. It tells us that this is not looking like a string, which is what is expected for the video ID prop. So one more time, let's pass item.value. And our showcase works just like before, but we were able to bring types generated from Keystatic into our front-end components. We've given authors the ability to add YouTube videos part of their showcase, but we've got some feedback that they would also like to be able to add videos inside blog posts. In other words, inside a post, content editors would love to be able to, just like they can add blog quotes or different heading, be able to add a video. Basically have a custom content block that they can put right in the middle of the document field. Well, you can do this with Keystatic, and let's do just that. In the Keystatic config, we will find the posts collection and then find the content field here. I will add a new property, component blocks, inside of which you can define custom, well, component blocks. Let's have a YouTube video block. I will wrap it in a component function that will give me TypeScript goodness. And so our component block needs a few things, including a label. So let's go label YouTube video. We'll also give our component block a schema. Let me scroll down a bit. And here, just like in our showcase, we just want a YouTube video ID, which is going to be a text field. We'll have, yes, a label and validation. And let's also add a description where we specify we want the ID and not the full URL, just to be clear. And you can see TypeScript is still really upset at us because our component block needs one more thing, a preview, which is how you want to render this custom block in the document field. So for now, let me just have an arrow function that returns null, will preview nothing. And now TypeScript is happy with our setup. So let's take a look at what we've got. Back in the first post document field, we now have this new dropdown, and if I click on it, we can add a YouTube video. This adds a bit of UI with an edit button where I can add the mandatory video ID. So let me leave it empty for now. I'll cancel this, and let's see about improving the preview for this component. I can return JSX in the preview here, but if I want to do this, I need to change the extension of the Keystatic config from TS to TSX. So now it knows to handle the syntax. When you do change the name of the config file, you'll need to restart the server for the front end to work. So let's do that quickly. There you go. And so let's try this. We will receive the props. And let's display something different, whether the video ID is set or not. So props.field.YouTubeVideoID.value, question mark. Is this set? If so, let's return a p tag that says video ID props. Once again, fields.YouTubeVideoID.value. And if it's not defined, thank you, Copilot. Yes, we will say, please enter a YouTube video ID. All right, so because right now we haven't set the video ID, I'm expecting to see this as a preview. And yep, there it is. And now let's go and edit this, and I will add a valid YouTube video ID. And now it says video ID with the ID. We can take this one step further and actually display the video embed. Remember, we've already created our YouTube video component, and so we could use this to render the video if we have a video ID. In the Keystatic config, I will import the showcase YouTube video, and maybe the name showcase is now not the best since we're using it in a non-showcase context, but whatever. And now if the YouTube video ID value is set here, let's instead use showcase YouTube and pass the video ID, which is props.fields.YouTubeVideoID.value. And so now when we've defined the video ID, we should actually see the video itself in our document editor. And look at this, here it is. That's pretty cool, hey? Right now on the single post page. And let's just add a little more text after the video. We'll save our post. And if we look in our content files in post, firstpost.mdoc, you can see we have this custom YouTube video component block followed by the paragraph of text we've just added. So we have a YouTube video custom component block inside our first post, but if we visit the first post on the front end, it's not displaying. You can see the paragraph before and the paragraph after the custom video block, but this thing here is not being rendered. Let's take a look at our posts page. So app, site, slug, page.tsx. And if I scroll down, you'll see that our post is rendered with the document renderer. We're passing our content to this document renderer, but before any custom component blocks show anything, we need to define them in the component blocks prop for the document renderer. So this is an object. And for each component block, we'll need a key that matches the component block name in the Keystatic config. In our Keystatic config file, we created the YouTube video component block, and therefore we'll need a YouTube video key right here. So we want to render our showcase YouTube video component, and thanks to the types we've set up, it tells us that we need a video ID prop. So let's add it. And we'll need here to receive that prop of YouTube video ID. So let's accept the props here, and we should be able to pass props.YouTube video ID. So because we've defined this YouTube video component block, now when the document renderer sees this YouTube video custom component, it'll know what to render because we've defined it here. And as a result, now our front end should show the video. And yep, there it is. You can see it between the paragraph before and the paragraph after. Right now on the single post page, I've added a bunch of content in the first post. So this is what the markdoc file looks like. This is what the front end looks like. And this is what the admin UI for this post looks like. And the reason I have added this content is to make it more realistic of a slightly longer blog post that pushes the other fields down the page. So notice how all the fields are stacked on top of each other in one column. And I want to show you an alternative layout that you can have for your entry pages in the Keystatic admin UI with the entry layout property. So in the config file for the posts collection, I will add a new entry layout property, which as you can see can be defined to form, which is the default, or content, which is this alternative layout. And here's the content entry layout. So all the fields except the main document field are placed in the sidebar, and then the main focus area is given for the content field. I have a pretty small screen resolution for these videos, but if I zoom out, you might get a better sense for this sort of Zen mode, focus mode that you get with the content entry layout. Up to this point, we've only worked with collections, which are lists of things, but Keystatic also lets you create one-off entries called singletons. Let's create one of those to collect our social media links. I will collapse the whole collection object here, and below have a singletons object. And we'll create a singleton called social links. We'll wrap this in a singleton, once again to get TypeScript help. We'll give it a label of social links, and I can't believe it, but Copilot pretty much did exactly what I wanted, except we're going to use text fields instead of URLs. And just to make sure that it's pretty clear for content editors, we'll add a description for each. I'll fast forward this bit. All right, so that should be pretty clear. The last thing I want to do to be consistent with where we stored our posts and authors is set the path to content/social links. And let's visit our admin UI. Right away, you can see we have a new singletons category in the sidebar and in the dashboard. And we have our social links, and I'll go and fill that up with my personal details. Pretty straightforward. And so we should now have a new content social links YAML file with the 3 social links stored. Let's jump in our front-end code. And so in the site main layout, let's add a footer below the children page content. And here we'll have an H2 saying find us on, followed by an unordered list where we're going to display our social links. I'll import the reader util we've used a few times. I will turn this root layout to an async function, and then here go const social links equals await reader dot, this time singletons dot social links dot read. We don't need to pass a slug or anything because singletons are a one-off instance. And so inside of there, I should have the 3 properties, Twitter, GitHub, LinkedIn. In the unordered list, if we have social links.twitter, we're going to have an li, and this is an external link, so we'll use an anchor tag. The href will be https twitter.com, and yes, I know it's called X, but let's call it Twitter here, / and here we'll pass social links.twitter And let's add the rel of no opener, no referrer, and the target of blank. So now if we look at the front end, we can see the footer with find us on Twitter. And yep, it works. Okay, so let's add an HR here just for some separation. Maybe it should go outside the footer. And then we'll duplicate this twice. It's a bit messy, but you get the idea. So the second one will be, let's select all the Twitters and replace with GitHub. And the third one is going to be LinkedIn. And I believe the URL here is linkedin.com/in/the username or handle or ID. I'm not sure how it's called. So we have Twitter, we have GitHub going to my profile, and we have LinkedIn going God knows where. Yay! Look at it, it's working. And because we've put this in our layout, it's going to be available on every post, on every author page. And this is a tangent, but for good measure, since we have a footer in our layout, we should also have a header that takes us back to the homepage. So still in our layout, before the children here, let's add a header with the nav. And here we'll use the next link. The href will be homepage, and it says home. Voila. So now I have a link to home. It still shows on the homepage, which is a bit silly, but let's not waste time on this because we are deviating from the main topic. Our Keystatic admin UI is showing our collections and singletons, and why this is great. This might be a bit confusing to some non-technical content editors. Singletons is a bit of a weird word. I want to show you a way that you can create categories and name them however you want, organize your sidebar and dashboard layouts in something that might make more sense for a specific use case. In the Keystatic config at the top level, so let's go after storage, I will reach for the UI options. And there's a few cosmetic and UX things we can do to our Keystatic admin UI in here. Let's change the navigation. It's important to understand that once you define a custom navigation here, you take over the default behavior. So if I was to save this empty object like so, you can see that we've completely removed any of the content and nothing is showing anymore. And the idea here is to recreate the sort of taxonomy that you think makes sense for your project, but you need to make sure that you cover every bit of content that is generated by Keystatic. So let's say I want a writing section, because we talk about blogs and authors, arguably writing related. I would have a writing key, and inside of there, an array of singletons or collections that we want to list under that writing category. And you can see I get the suggestions of every possible collection or singleton. So let's add posts and let's add authors below there. And try to guess what will show up in our admin UI. Correct, we have a writing category with our posts and authors. And let's say to make it dead simple for content editors to understand what it's for, have a footer links category, which has the social links singleton. So now we have our writing section and our footer links section. You may have noticed that there is also this triple dash special symbol that you can use if you want to create a divider. Let's put authors again and posts again just to make it feel a bit more full. So obviously you would never do this where you have the same content twice, but just to demo this here, if you needed a category with a separator within the category, this is how you would do it. And it's pretty cool how the dashboard and the sidebar navigation follow this navigation UI settings. So let's go back to just posts and authors. And we'll leave it at that. And this is arguably more useful for content editors. It really depends of who are the members on your team, what your sort of content structures are, and so on. Let's make our Keystatic admin UI feel a little bit more custom and bespoke by changing the site title and the logo. In the UI options of the Keystatic config, we will add a new brand key and the name to Keystatic mini course. And here it is. And a really nice little detail here is that if your title is too long, the site title will automatically be truncated depending on what space is available to display it. So let's go back to Keystatic mini course. And next we're going to change this Keystatic logo with the mark option. And so you can specify the path to an image, but you can also use an inline SVG, which is what I will do here. In my clipboard, I have a film strip icon from Heroicons. I will just remove the Tailwind class names since we're not using Tailwind here. I know, Simon, not using Tailwind, what? And it's obviously way too big. And this is what the Tailwind classes were doing. Let's use a height and width property instead. And now look at this, we have a custom logo and custom title for our site. And because our SVG uses current color for this stroke, the logo or icon will automatically adapt to the dark mode. Check this out. And by the way, I just realized I have not shown you dark mode yet. This is a thing that Keystatic lets you choose based on the system OS settings, or have dark or light. And it's a pretty nice touch that our custom SVG logo is inheriting the correct stroke color based on light or dark modes. We're going to take this local website, which has currently 2 posts and 2 authors, and we're going to deploy it to Vercel. Here's the GitHub repository for this website. You can see that I have a folder for each video in this series, and also have a prod directory, which is the one we're going to deploy for the production app. Here I am in my Vercel account, and I'm going to add a new project, and we're going to import this egghead Keystatic Next.js blog. Okay, so here I need to edit the root directory and point to the prod folder, and it should detect that it's a Next.js website. And so everything should be good to go to deploy. So we're going to let the build do its thing. And while it's finishing the deployment, I'll give you a spoiler alert. Not everything is going to work properly just yet. All right, so it's deployed and it looks like the screenshot of the homepage has worked. Let's go visit that page. And so now I am on the deployed vercel.app subdomain. And I can visit the first post. Here it is. Let's go back home and visit the second post. But now let's see what happens when we visit an author. So let's click on Simon. Uh-oh. So what's going on? Looks like the posts are available, but the authors are not. And there's a reason for that, and I'll show you why in the code. So if we go in our app, site, slug, and the slug page, which is the individual post page, you can see that we have our component. And at the bottom here, we use this generateStaticParams function. That is what will generate static pages for each of the posts based on the slug. If we look at the authors page, we do not have such thing. We just have the component. And so because we're not generating these static params, no HTML page is generated for authors. And so these pages don't exist. If we look at the log for the Vercel deployment, you can see that the slug pages here marked with this black bullet, which is pre-rendered static HTML. The first and second posts were created, whereas for the authors, this is a dynamic server-rendered page. And so if the author page is server-rendered, why are the authors not found? Well, let's try to visit the Keystatic admin UI on the deployed site. And whoops, you can see that we have 0 posts and 0 authors. The Keystatic config is still red and the content types are found, but the content directory, which is our file system locally, doesn't exist on the deployment. And so Keystatic cannot find any posts. Right now, Keystatic is set up to use the local storage strategy, which means that it's reading and writing directly on the file system. And the content directory, which is where we've been storing our content locally, well, this directory does not exist on the Vercel deployment instance. And so we have 2 ways of fixing this. The first one is to change Keystatic's storage strategy from local to something like Cloud or GitHub, so that our content reads and writes can be operated directly on the GitHub repo. And the other option, if you ever only want to change content locally and not change modes to GitHub or Cloud, is to use generateStaticParams on the author slug page to make sure that each single author is statically generated, just like it's the case for the posts. And we'll be covering these 2 options in the next segments. We're in the individual author page here, and we're going to generate static parameters for each author so that Next.js can generate a static HTML page for each. For each author, the parameters we need is the slug, which is the author slug as a string. So I'll scroll to the bottom of the page. And here we're going to export an async function called generateStaticParams. So we want to grab all the author slugs, const author slugs equals, and we have our reader here that we used already on the page. So await reader.collections.authors.list. And list gives us an array of strings, which are the slugs for each author, which is perfect. We need this generateStaticParams function to return an array of params objects. And so here we can return. So let's map over these author slugs And for each author slug, we're going to return an object. Let's do an implicit return slug author slug. And so with that in place, when we build the Next.js site, this generateStaticParams function will run and generate a static HTML page for each slug or each author. So let's try and run the build locally, npm run build. And we should be able to see the breakdown of what pages are generated statically or dynamically. And yep, here you go. You can see that now the authors pages have been generated as pre-rendered static HTML, and we have Jed and Simon. So I will quickly commit this change and I'll push these changes, which is going to trigger a new build on Vercel. So let's go check it out. Yep, there it is. It's building right now. And so what we're hoping is now, well, we actually know because we tried locally, but we just want to verify that the Jed and Simon author pages are generated statically, which they are. And so we should be able to access these pages now on the deployed front end. Here's the live URL once again. And so I'll visit the first post and then go and try to visit Simon or Jed's page. And hopefully it is available. And yep, it is with the showcase. And let's also verify that Jed's page is working. And sure enough, it is. Let's enable remote collaboration on our Keystatic site and allow people to log in the deployed URL here and allow team members to create or edit content without setting up the site locally. Their changes are going to interface directly with the GitHub repository. In this video, we're going to connect our project with Keystatic Cloud, which is the easiest way to get set up. I'll visit Keystatic.Cloud. And you can see that here I'm already logged in with my account. But the first time you visit Keystatic Cloud, let me visit it incognito. You'll be invited to create an account with your GitHub account or email and password. Creating an account is free. And once you're set up, you'll be taken to your dashboard where you can add and manage teams within which you can add and manage projects. So pretending I have a fresh new account, I will add a team. I'll call this team Simon Swiss and add the team. And you can see that it has one user, myself, and 0 projects at this point. And here I will add a project so that we can connect our website. The first time you connect Keystatic to a GitHub repo, you'll likely need to install the GitHub app. This is going to take you to your GitHub account, so I want to connect this to Simon Swiss. And then you can select what repos you would like to authorize. So you can authorize all repos, but if you want to be a bit more defensive, you can say, hey, I only want this egghead Keystatic Next.js blog project, which is the one we want to connect, and then install and authorize. And excuse me while I verify the authentication. There you go, I've done it from my phone. So now I am redirected back to Keystatic Cloud, and you can see my organization or user account is available here. Nice, and because I've only allowed the GitHub app to have access to one repo, there is only one repo in the list. And you can change the name, but I'll keep it here like this. Actually, I will not because it's too long. Let's call it Keystatic 101 and create the project. All right, so the project is created and now it's telling me how to connect the project to Keystatic Cloud. So you can see in our config file, instead of storage kind local that we had before, we need to switch that to cloud and then specify the project key for the cloud account. And then the second step is to specify the project URLs, which is where the site is deployed. So let's do the first step first. I will go in my codebase on the Keystatic file and switch storage kind to cloud. And I also need to pass a cloud object here. So I'll copy that and paste it here. And I'll commit those changes. Nice, and while it's redeploying, I'm going to copy the project URL, which is the URL where we've deployed our website on Vercel. So this URL right there. So let's save the settings. So on Vercel, the setup Keystatic Cloud deployment has successfully completed. And you can see that from Keystatic Cloud, we now have the URL of the deployed side /Keystatic, which is the admin UI. So let's visit that. And because this is the first time we visit the website since connected to Cloud, it's going to ask us to log in with Cloud. Since we logged in with Cloud, it's going to automatically log us in, and then we should be able to see 2 posts and 2 entries. And we should have 2 posts and 2 authors. I think I know what's happening. And this is due to my folder setup for this video series, where I have a directory for each lesson, and then we're actually deploying this prod directory instead of the root folder. In the Keystatic docs, you can find information about the path prefix. And essentially, if you're working in a monorepo, which I sort of am in this project, you can have this storage path prefix to kind of prefix where you want your path to start. So when you have path content posts, like I have here, it's going to prefix it with this. This is going to try to do reads and writes from the root level of the GitHub repository. So let's try that. Add a path prefix of prod, which corresponds to this directory here, which is where a Next.js site we're deploying lives. And so I'll commit this change, and hopefully that should solve our problem. So let's go on our deployed Keystatic admin UI and hard refresh this. And I'm hoping that we will find the 2 posts and 2 authors. Hey, there they are, nice. And with that aside out of the way, let's take a look at what has changed in our Keystatic admin UI. You can see that we have information about the GitHub branch. We're currently on the main branch, and there's options to create new branches, see other branches, but we just have one. And that should be a pretty good indication that our Keystatic admin UI is now connected with our GitHub repo. Matter of fact, you can access the GitHub repo from here if you want. So what does this mean in terms of workflow? Well, let's find out. Let's create a new branch, new post. And you can see that we've now switched to the new post branch. Okay, interesting. And so because it's called new post, well, let's create a new post from deployed site. So I'll add myself as an author and write something. Let's add a heading too. This is cool. And if we wanted, remember we created a YouTube video custom block, so we could add a video here. So I will add a YouTube ID. This is a very new video by Jason Lengsdorf. This is awesome, you should check it out. And so I think that's good enough. I'm going to create this new post. And let's talk about what's happened. So the entry is created. You can see we have a little badge, which is basically telling me that there is one new post in this branch compared to the main branch. So if I go to posts, I have 3 posts with 1 added. If I switch to the main branch, we still only have 2 posts. Going back to new post, there is this added post, and in the drop-down menu, I can now create a pull request. This is going to take me right in the GitHub account, open a PR, and if we scroll down to see the changes, this is pretty straightforward. It created a markdoc file with the post from deployed site with the markdoc content and the YouTube video custom block. So I can create this pull request and ask my friends for a review, or if I feel very comfortable because this is an easy change, I can merge this PR, YOLO. And I haven't even shown that, but Vercel had created a deploy preview for that new post and then now has deployed to production the new change. And so if we visit the production site now, we will have 3 posts on the homepage. And here's the post I created from the Vercel deployed instance, haven't touched my code base, synchronized directly with GitHub. This is indeed cool. If you still want to connect your project with GitHub but do it manually, you can use the GitHub mode in Keystatic. In the admin UI, I will change the storage kind from Cloud to GitHub, which is one of the 3 options. And you see that TypeScript is telling me, hey, something's wrong. When you set the storage mode to GitHub, you also need to have a repo property. All right, so be it. So repo, and the repo can either be an object with the owner and name property. So in our case, the owner is correct, but the name is egghead Keystatic Next.js blog. And I don't think it matters, but let me comment out the cloud property. And if you want, you can also pass your repo as a string, which is the org or username / the repo name, like so. Both will be valid. So there's a bit of manual setup to get the GitHub mode working. We're not going to commit these changes directly. We first need to run the project locally to trigger some setup flow. So I'll start the server, npm run dev, and visit the localhost version of my site. The first time I go to the Keystatic admin UI, it's going to prompt me to authenticate with GitHub. And so let's do this. And here you see that if you've already created the GitHub app, which we have when setting up Keystatic Cloud, you need to add some environment variables in your project. And alternatively, you can go through the flow of creating a GitHub app, which is similar to what we've done for Keystatic Cloud. Here, I'll pretend I have not created a GitHub app before and will create a new one. For the deploy app URL, I can paste the deployed app on Vercel, and the GitHub org is Simon Swiss. All right, so let's create a GitHub app. I'll call this one Keystatic 101. And like you've seen before, it's going to ask me to authorize this app. So the app creation was successful, and now I need to go and install it for my Simon Swiss org. And then once again, I'll only allow the egghead Keystatic Next.js blog project and authorize. So now it will take me back to the Keystatic admin UI. And this time I'm logged in with the GitHub mode. There is my GitHub repo with the 2 branches, and I can create a new branch, GitHub mode. And for this one, let's create a new author. Let's call this author Gina. We won't add avatar or showcase, but what we'll do is go in the posts and edit the post we deployed from Keystatic Cloud and add Gina here to the list of authors. So I'll save that. And now on my dashboard, you can see that there are changes flagged for both authors and post, and I can create a pull request. This is going to take me to the GitHub repo one more time, and you can see the changes, a new author JSON file for Gina, and then Gina is listed in the array of authors for that post. So I'll create the pull request. And something I forgot to show last time, you can see Vercel is deploying the branch preview, and oh, it just finished deploying. And so before we merge the pull request, we can visit the branch preview. For this specific branch, you can see the Vercel UI for branch previews. And so here, if I visit the third post, I should see Gina added to the authors, and Gina should have her own page, which is arguably a little bare bones. So behind the scenes, when we created the GitHub app, a .env file was generated with the necessary environment variables for Keystatic to work in GitHub mode. If I look in my local file system here, in authors, there is no Gina file because the changes were not made locally, like local mode, but directly on GitHub. So let me quickly merge that pull request that adds Gina as an author. And so here I am on the main branch. And so if I git pull from that branch, we have now pulled these new content changes from the repo. And so now inside my content folder and authors, I also have Gina. All right, so we set up locally, but now we need to make our deployed Vercel instance aware and enabled for this GitHub mode. Before I do, we do not want to commit our .env. This is a local thing we're gonna copy over. So in the git ignore file, I will add .env. And so now I will commit the changes that change the mode to GitHub. Make sure the .env file is not part of your changes. And let's push that. That's going to trigger another build in Vercel, and oops, you can see we have an error. What's going on? So if we check the logs, you can see that we're missing required config, and it's telling us to copy the environment variables. And that's actually exactly what we should expect. And so like I said, we did not commit the .env file to GitHub, but in Vercel, in settings and environment variables, we will copy and paste our values from the .env file created locally. So this is great UX by Vercel. You can copy the entire .env file and paste it all in the first field, and it's going to create the individual key value pairs as needed. I'll save this. The variables have been added successfully. And so I need to go back to deployments, and we're going to trigger a new build. So redeploy. And hopefully this time, because of the environment variables in place, the build will succeed. All right, nice. The deployment has completed. You can see we have Gina as a new static HTML page. And let's go visit the production site and verify that we also have Gina as an author and the page works. Perfect. And let's visit the Keystatic admin UI in production. This is the first time I visited on the deployed site. So again, I have to log in with GitHub. You won't have to do this after the first time. And here we are in GitHub mode in production. So this time I will do changes directly to main. I'll create a new post called YOLO from prod, shipping to prod from deployed GitHub mode. No authors. Let's create this. If I go to the GitHub repo, you can see that this commit has been done to main. If you want to avoid this risky behavior, you can enable branch protection, which I don't have here for this demo. And the build has succeeded. You can see that the status is ready with this YOLO from prod. So let's visit our live site and you can see our new post YOLO from prod. Oh yeah. The GitHub or cloud mode in Keystatic are pretty powerful, but sometimes it's not what you want when you work locally. This whole dance of creating a new branch, opening a pull request, merging it, and then pulling the changes back into your local project can be sort of irritating when you want to move fast. And you also lose the ability, which is something I do all the time, to edit content directly by editing Markdoc, YAML, or JSON file. I want quick changes. When you're deving and prototyping, chances are you actually want to use local mode because it's much faster. But you also don't want to alienate other people who want to contribute to your project in production. And a really nice compromise here is to change the storage mode based on whether you're in development or production. Let's do this. Const is prod equals process.env.nodenv is equal to production. So if we are in production, we want to use storage kind local, but if we're in prod, we want to use GitHub, or actually let's go back to Keystatic Cloud. We could do it directly inline here, but let's set up a local mode here, which is an object. And to help us, we're going to type this as a local config, which is a type from Keystatic core, which is the type for the entire config in local mode. And here we can reach for the storage. So this is going to make sure that our local mode has the correct shape. We're going to set the kind to local. And that's all we want actually. We don't want the path prefix for local. And so let's create our other mode, const remote mode. Feel free to name it like you want. We're going to type this one as cloud config, or use GitHub config if you want to use GitHub mode. And again, we'll reach for the storage. So it should tell us what is missing. And here we want the kind to be cloud. And we do want the path prefix to be prod. And I think that's all we need. So now I'm going to re-enable the cloud settings since we use cloud mode. And instead of this here, I will check, is it prod? If prod, use remote mode, which is the cloud mode. And if not, use local mode. The best way to test that it works is to run the project locally. And we're fully expecting to be running in local mode. So npm run dev. And the surefire way to know that you're in local mode is exactly that. We don't have any UI information about the GitHub repository, like branches, etc. So we are in local mode, which means that that little change that I did locally at the start of this video should be available in my first post. And there it is. Super quick dev loop. So if I save this, my local file is saved. And if I go super duper quick dev loop and save, this is updated here as well. So this is much more empowering when you do development or even demos or you teach Keystatic to your team. So now let's go and commit our changes. And actually, I don't want to commit this little demo, so I'll remove that one. And so the only changes we have is what we've created, this logic to use local mode or cloud mode based on the node env variable. So we're going to let that build. And the hope is when we visit the production Keystatic admin UI, we are in cloud mode. All right, deployment completed. So let's go and visit the site and visit Keystatic. And I am hoping to see the cloud mode, and that makes me super happy. So in summary, we are allowing remote contributors to edit the site through Keystatic Cloud and interface with the GitHub repository, but we also allow devs to pull the site locally and allow them to have a really quick dev loop and also enable them to edit code directly to make content changes if they want.